Hello and welcome back to the Notcast number 406. Today is Wednesday, 18th of September 2024, and I'm going to introduce you to two terrifying things. The first one is a middle-aged bloke with no hair talking about Pink Floyd. The world is literally full of those guys, and I am just another statistic in the great prog rock battles and classic rock battles of the modern day ages. The second thing is the most terrifying two words you will ever hear if you're a music fan, and those two words are solo album. No, not About Face by David Gilmour, but solo album. Solo albums have a bad reputation. A reputation that's probably a little bit undeserved, actually, indicating that they're perhaps like 1/4 as good as the band albums. Not all bands are equal. Not every band is made out of four equal standing people. Some bands never do solo albums. Some bands do nothing but solo albums. Talking of which, the boundary between what is a band album and what is a solo album can sometimes get pretty hairy. If you're Front 242, some of the later albums that are solo albums actually have the same people that play on the Front 242 albums, which perhaps is one way of saying the Front 242 albums are also practically solo albums, if that makes any sense. The second thing is occasionally you have solo albums that become band albums through contractual necessity. I'm thinking more specifically around Mask by The Mission and that last album by Spiritualized, or more correctly, Spaceman 3, half of which was Spiritualized and the other half of which was Sonic Boom. And when you look at the contracts and the number of albums that you have to fulfill and the leaving member clauses and all that kind of stuff, you end up kind of thinking, if I don't make another album, I could be sued to the moon and back for an advance that I'm never going to repay. And that is why sometimes you get bad albums, because they're contractual obligations. Monty Python, of course, had the Contractual Obligation album, which I'm not sure was a contractual obligation album, but there was also an unreleased Monty Python album from 1981 that was made up out of offtakes and bits and never got released, although copies of it do circulate on the interwebs. So there you have it. And in fact, with what I'm going to be talking about today, I'm not just going to be talking about one solo album. I'm going to be talking about four, one of which is so bad I don't actually have it. And then also I'm going to be talking about singles and all other kinds of guff by David Gilmour, Roger Waters, Nick Mason and Rick Wright in 1984, 40 long years ago. And talking of David Gilmour, 40 years after the release of About Face, last week, he released his, I think it's fifth solo album, Lookin' Strange, and I am seeing him this weekend at a dress rehearsal warm-up show in Brighton, which I can't believe I actually got tickets for. Ticket sales for that were atrocious, on the grounds that you'd go into the site, Ticketmaster would go, pick your seats, you'd pick two seats, you'd press add to basket, check out, and by the time it goes to check out, it goes, oh, someone's already bought them. So you have to go back and play whack-a-mole. I think it took me 24 or 25 attempts to find two pairs of tickets that weren't in anybody else's basket before it actually let me buy them. It was absurd, ridiculous, and nonsense. I feel a rant coming on, but that's a different Notcast, not this one. So today, instead, I'm going to talk about happier times when both David and I had full heads of hair and I hadn't yet gone grey. Floyd's story continues at a strange adjunct here. February 1983, and the final recording of the final Pink Floyd album with Nick Mason, David Gilmour and Roger Waters, called The Final Cut. An album that David referred to on stage at London's Meltdown in 2001 as the final straw. Or maybe he didn't refer to it there, maybe somewhere else, who knows. The Final Cut, as I mentioned a couple of months ago in my previous episode about it, is not an easy listen at all. In fact, if it's anything, it should be taken out of the easy listening box and put in one called hard, difficult, lemon, difficult listening, because it really is absolutely no fun, my babe. It's no fun at all. It's a 43-minute treatise upon the evils of war and the stupidity of mankind, which is also only vaguely related to things like melody. It's not great. And what you could see with that album was the difference between having Rick Wright in the band and not having Rick Wright in the band. The subtlety of the keys and the orchestration had been blown apart and replaced with bombast that wouldn't have been out of place in Superman 3, the musical. That sounds harsh. Yeah, it is harsh, but it's also true. Luckily, the Final Cut doesn't have any weird robot sisters in it. Yeah, I said that because Superman 3 does, and it's not very good. Instead, what we had is that Roger Waters went back into the same studio literally the next month with all the musicians that had helped make the final cut, apart from David and Nick, and made his own album, which I'm going to talk about quite soon because I'm doing this chronologically. And the first thing to be released on the 13th of February 1984, the first signs of life in Pink Floyd solo canon, was the single Blue Light, available here. Here's a 7-inch, which is backed with Cruise, which is not a great name for a song. And here's the American promotional 12-inch, which features extended and instrumental mixes by Francis Kervakian. I've never really taken Pink Floyd or David Gilmour or anyone to be a remixes kind of artist. I think, although there have been remixes for copyright purposes, I've never really listened to them and gone, do you know what this needs? This needs a donk on it. Although there is a donk on it remix of On an Island, which is a hidden track on it on the DVD, which isn't particularly good. Blue Light is... It says it's a special version, but it's not particularly good. So remixed by Francis Kervakian at Right Track in New York. Francis Kervakian, fresh off remixing Kraftwerk, then later to go on and do a whole bunch of 12-inch mixes for people like Pet Shop Boys, Depeche Mode, probably New Order, all those type of things. And he does exactly the same thing here, as he takes the essence of the track and he extends it out. He adds drum machines, and the whole thing just doesn't have the same kind of weightless, almost serene grace which Pink Floyd and David Gilmour have at this point with Blue Light and a few other songs. About Face by David Gilmour is clearly the songs which rock, and that's what it's designed to do. So if you want to think about a spiritual successor to something like Run Like Hell, possibly Comfortably Numb, Young Lust, the songs that get writing credits basically from David on the wall, this is where About Face goes, is that it takes those heavier pounding songs, which in retrospect I don't think David really felt were really him. And Blue Light got to the staggering chart position in the US, number 62 with a bullet, and then out again. And then it was followed up on the 5th of March 1984 by About Face, his second solo LP. Again, this looks like a pretty damn generic solo LP from a member of Pink Floyd in 1984. You could easily replace this text up here and put Steve Hackett's Project on or something, and you'd end up with something that, sorry, I don't listen to Genesis. I don't like Genesis. I find all of their songs tedious, boring, and very, what's the word I'm thinking of here? Very just blah, really, is probably the word I'm thinking of here. And with About Face, what you get is a competent rock LP from the mid-80s that has very few redeeming features. Now, that sounds awful. It isn't. There's actually, near the end on here, is fantastic. I love that track. Let's Get Metaphysical is pretty good. Some of them, not so good. It's fair to say. I think it was with David and Roger and Nick effectively splintering. It was pretty clear at that point that no, there's not going to be another Pink Floyd record. David had songs in the canon, although Roger said, what am I doing? Stopping them from writing songs and presenting them to me? I think perhaps David wanted to work in a more democratic fashion with people which he felt more equal to, as opposed to perhaps the architecture that you had towards the end of Pink Floyd, where it very much felt like Roger Waters was the boss and everyone else was kind of doffing their caps and being grateful for the chance to go and be with and around a really miserable, power-hungry dude who he was at the time. And I think David wanted to get back to playing music and remembering how good it was to play music and what it was like to enjoy playing music as opposed to treating it as a job and doing, as Rick said, another album about his dead dad. Which obviously Rick had been out of the band for a few years at that point, but he nailed it completely. So we got About Face, which is lacking the subtlety and the mystery of Pink Floyd, but it does have the strident, almost direct rockisms of some of the parody tracks and some of the stuff like Young Lust, Have a Cigar, those type of things. If you haven't heard this, by the way, don't rush out to get it right now, because David Gilmour has a new album out and you should enjoy that. But if you want, I'd really like something that sounds like Run Like Hell, but perhaps not quite so great, then this is exactly the album to go for, and it does have some great tracks on it. So it opens with Until We Sleep, which is straight and to the point. No big intro, nothing like that. Just boom and straight in. And then lyrics which are about, I'm not quite sure really. I just don't really know. And I don't know what most of these songs are about, truth be told, even though I've listened to them and have known them for 20 years. Murder is pretty obviously about the murder of John Lennon, I think. And again, that's words and music by David Gilmour. Love on the Air, which was the second single released from the album. And yes, where have I stuck it? There's a 7-inch somewhere around here of Love on the Air. Here it is. Hello, I'm a 7-inch. So Love on the Air, the second single from the album. And this is a nice bit of graphic design. But again, I'm not a huge fan of record covers that have pictures of dudes on. I just don't like them. It doesn't communicate to me what it is about the record that makes me want to buy it. This is very 80s. You could imagine this hanging as a poster in Athena or something next to a picture of a woman scratching her bottom. Or maybe a man holding a baby. Actually, that reminds me, one of my girlfriends had that poster up in her room and it didn't put me off her, but it was the 90s. Love on the Air is not very good either. It has lyrics by Pete Townsend, which was handy and helpful. And Pete obviously is very good at lyrics. But yeah, it's okay. It's quite good, but it's pretty bland. It would be a mid-tier, mid-70s Floyd album track that nobody would get particularly bothered about, Love on the Air. And when you hear it, you can hear why perhaps as artists, sometimes it's better not to work in a solo capacity or to work in a more democratic fashion. If it's just one person and everyone else is in service of that one person's vision, it ends up becoming very insular, very one-dimensional, and just reflecting exactly what that one individual wants. And sometimes it's not 1 + 1 + 1 + 1. It's like 2 × 2 × 2 × 2, or 4 × 4 × 4 × 4. And then you end up with 4 people and it then multiplies as opposed to adds, or more than the sum of its parts, is probably the best way to describe it. Although I do believe one of the original titles for the Echoes album in 2001 was the sum of the parts, which I thought was quite clever, but I thought Echoes was perhaps slightly better as a title. Love on the Air, second single, not great. Absolutely not. Good, not great, sorry. But what you could do is, if you're particularly canny and you could take the best of each of the 4 albums, you could probably get one pretty good album out of it. Still probably not as good as More, but okay. Yeah, pretty okay, actually. We have Blue Light, the single which I've mentioned before, which is a bit rockist. Now, rock is great. I fucking love rock. I love crunchy guitars. I like squealing solos. I like drums that sound like cupboards falling down the stairs. That's who I am. I like something where someone's tuned it in the wrong way, pressed the wrong button, and it sounds like a chainsaw buzzing right next to your ear. Love that. But unfortunately, that's when it's done well. This Blue Light, not so great. And then, of course, Out of the Blue, which is the album closer. I don't quite know. I mean, reading these lyrics, and I'm sat there going, I'm not quite sure what you've got to say. And obviously, this is where David has recognised very clearly that he's not great at lyric writing. The lyric writing for all of his albums from here will be by collaborators who are far better at words. But sometimes people that are very, very close to him, sometimes that are people able to understand and articulate what's on his mind. And so, especially when Polly Samson became involved as his partner, was able to reflect the words of his thoughts and push them into a way that works as song lyrics. I'm going to get to that when we get talking about the Division Bell, because I think Polly gets a poor rep for the work that she's done. Side 2, All Lovers Are Deranged. Thanks, Pete Townsend. Not amazing. It's okay, but it's quite cynical. And then we have You Know I'm Right. Now, You Know I'm Right is one of rock's historic classic bitching tracks, which is basically saying to the guy that you used to be in a band with, you know I'm right, which is not actually the case. And of course, the lyrics are, you can scream and shout with all your might, dig in your heels and hold on tight. Either you are wrong or I am right. You speak the lines you've overheard, the ring of truth in every word. You know you're right and that's absurd. We really seem to have a problem here, but is it you or me? whatever I have going through my mind, you always disagree. It's a matter of opinions. It's not a simple fact. Why don't you try to see the other side? Don't turn your back. It's not quite up there with How Do You Sleep or its response track, but it's fairly clear that there's a problem, isn't there? And the relationship is insignificant. I mean, you'd read that and you'd go, that's probably a divorce song, which effectively is what happened and what happened shortly in the history of Pink Floyd. Then we have Cruise, which is totally forgettable. I don't understand that. Let's Get Metaphysical. And Let's Get Metaphysical, by the way, would be brilliant as an opening track on a Floyd album. I think it's this gentle, undulating instrumental, the type of stuff that David can do in his sleep, and just really carries this air of mysticism and this kind of air of gentle kind of wonder, which is one of the things that Floyd do very, very well when they're absolutely at their best. And then we have Near the End. And again, Near the End, what a shame that my favourite two tracks on the album are the last two tracks on the record, because then you think, oh, so close. But they lean towards the epic side of things. And so About Face by David Gilmour, second solo album, pretty good. Not great, not amazing, pretty good. It got a CD reissue in 2006. Here it is, punted out at the same time as the On an Island era. And like a great many CDs, sometimes people thought, well, there's not much point really putting out an album, is there? Why would I do that? Okay, maybe not the best photo ever. But again, this is why I don't like albums with pictures of people on, because I believe in the concept of the complete work of art, and therefore the cover needs to reflect the contents of what it is. The cover is packaging. Band t-shirts are advertising. This is advertising what's in, and what you've got a guy, and I'm not quite sure what this is trying to signify or to communicate. It's just a picture of a dude. So it's fair to say I haven't updated my my iPod with that. David went on tour and he played Hammersmith Odeon in London, which I think was on the 30th of April 1984. It was released as a VHS. His band included Chris Slade on drums, and Greg Dechart on keyboards, Mickey Feet on bass, whoever that is, Jody Linscott on percussion, Mick Ralphs on guitar, and Ralph Ravenscroft. Nick Mason did come and guest on Comfortably Numb. It was released on DVD unofficially in Brazil, so this is an unofficial Brazilian DVD. It was also released on VHS in America. It was it's a completely average, completely normal mid-80s concert movie. It's almost definitely on YouTube, and that's where you should watch it as opposed to pay for it, because I bought this I think in 2006, I think, when YouTube hadn't even launched, or if it had, it was known by about 3 people and a dog. Oh dear, the downfall of everything after that, isn't it? That wasn't the end. There was a lot more to come. David was still touring, and on the 1st of May 1984 he played Birmingham Odeon, where I saw Living Daylights. It was a 1,500 capacity cinema. I wasn't there because I wasn't even 11 years old. However, apparently he only sold 200 tickets in Birmingham for the show, which was where he started to think, maybe I need the Pink Floyd name back, which, given how fast tickets have been selling both for David Gilmour solo and Pink Floyd, is a very astute thing, actually, but also to kind of go, maybe the anonymity of Pink Floyd doesn't always work in one's favour, does it? Because it means that people kind of overlook who you are and what you do, because they don't quite know. So, if you went to most people in 1984, who's David Gilmour, they'd be like, don't know. If you went, who's Pink Floyd? They'd be, oh, it's Pink Floyd. But if you went, okay, who's Nick Mason? They'd be like, is it a solicitor? Who's Rick Wright? And we go, plumber? Who's Roger Waters? Oh, that guy. Which, of course, meant that Roger Waters thought, I am Pink Floyd, and the Muffins will never do it, as he said to Bob Ezrin. How wrong he was. The tour of David Gilmour was stripped back. It was just lights and music. No Mr. Screen, no props, nothing. Just a man and his band. But he played America. in May and July, and he played Stockholm on the 24th of April, which resulted in this unofficial release, The Stockholm Syndrome, which came out relatively recently, taken from a radio broadcast. Yes, it's still sealed because I haven't listened to the CD, but I do have listened to the downloads many times, and this is a full 15-song set featuring a number of Floyd tracks, specifically, let's just quickly get this right, Run Like Hell and Comfortably Numb, as opposed to anything else, which actually you would have thought, oh, maybe you do wish you were here, maybe you'd do something else. No, just 2 songs from Pink Floyd there. So the first time that most people outside of Earl's Court got to hear him play Comfortably Numb in London, it was as a solo artist and not as a member of Pink Floyd. That tour didn't sell a huge amount of tickets, but that didn't stop the rest of the band doing stuff. On the 12th of March, whilst just a week after David had released About Face, Rick Wright and Dave Harris released Confusion, the first single from the short-lived, ill-fated Z project. This is not a great record. Z and their album Identity is not a great album. In fact, it's the only Pink Floyd solo album I've listened to and thought, God, I'm not buying that. Yeah, I even bought Roger Waters and Ron Geesin's The Body, which shows how loyal I am. And I bought Roger's Kyara. So that must tell you something, which is I'm pretty damn loyal, but Z is not good. There is nothing on the Z album which makes you think that it's Rick Wright playing. There's no Pink Floyd in there at all. I think Rick described it as an exercise in writing, as opposed to anything with an artistic content. And it was Fairlight exclusive, so all with new technology that now sounds very bloody dated. Rick Wright didn't sing any vocals on it at all whatsoever, despite having sung lead vocals on a number of Floyd tracks. And the whole thing just sounds like someone's put Rick Wright's name on it to sell a few more copies, as opposed to anything else. You listen to this and you go, that's the guy from Pink Floyd? No, I don't think so. Even Blue Pearl's Dancing Naked in the Rain, which features David Gilmour, Guy Pratt and Gary Wallace of the Delicate Sound of Thunder era of the bands, it's more Pink Floyd than Z, to be honest. Yeah, I'm looking at you over my glasses. Still, time waits for no man and time marches on, because Roger Waters had gone into the studio and he'd gone and recorded The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking, his second solo album, his first completely solo post-Floyd record. And I should point out the cover of this is censored in some countries because it has a woman's bottom on it, which I find gratuitous and pointless. I don't really understand why it's there. The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking is my least favourite Roger Waters solo LP. In 1979, Roger took 2 ideas to the band. One was The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking. The other one was called The Wall. And he said, one's going to be a Floyd LP, one's going to be a solo LP. David was leaning towards The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking as being perhaps the one with more potential, but he was outvoted by the rest of the band, and The Wall became a Pink Floyd album. Imagine if The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking had been like a Pink Floyd record. Oh, not so sure about that. No, and I'll kind of tell you why, because obviously at the time that The Wall was recorded, Roger already had his eye on the door. He had already left. He was just still in the room, because clearly he said, I'm going to do a solo LP. You don't have a choice. That's what I'm going to do. And that's kind of a bit cynical. It's a bit kind of like, I don't need you guys, Pink Floyd are my backing band. I'll go off and do my own thing. I'll pick you up and I'll put you down like a child's toy whenever I feel like it. And I can think of other people in bands that do that and that come back to the band that actually both made them famous and was the most potent creatively. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Damon Albarn, not that you notice. And kind of like just pick up the band as and when they feel like it, which feels a little bit kind of both disloyal and a little bit cynical. But Roger said, that's it. This is going to be the last album I'm going to make. I'm going to go out and do Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking. And he went into the same studio, which, if I recall correctly, and according to here, is Olympic and Eel Pie. Olympic was in Barnes, actually, just up the road from where my friend Mark used to live. And Eel Pie, I think, was an island off in the Thames. And at the Billiard Room between February and December 1983. So February 1983, Pink Floyd recording at Olympic, Eel Pie, and the Billiard Room, and some other locations bring the album sessions for a final cut to an end. Roger Waters, never one to let the bed go cold, leaped straight in the same month with a new version of his creative vision. All the people that played on the final cut, apart from David and Nick. So that's Ray Cooper on percussion, Michael Kamen on piano, Andy Newmark on drums, David Sanborn on saxophone, Roger Waters, rhythm, bass, guitar and vocals, in general all-round goddamn genius. Oh, okay. Sorry, stealing his advertising poster from later on. The creative genius of Pink Floyd, he said modestly. And went into the same studio and did the same stuff. He recorded the Pink Floyd album that he never got to record as his own first solo LP. And lo and behold, we have basically a guy that comes in and went, I am the genius in the band. The rest of you are useless. Here we go. And then suddenly you have Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking, which in my opinion is a pretty crap LP, truth be told. The first single, The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking, was released on the 16th of April, 1984. So that means that in April 1984, David stuck out Love on the Air as a single. David was touring. Rick Wright had released the Z album under the which was called Identity, and Waters was launching his solo LP. About the only person that wasn't launching anything was Nick Mason, but he was working on stuff in the meantime. So although the wall was chosen over Pros and Cons, and Pros and Cons was written in 1978 and rejected by Pink Floyd, Roger's ego told him, everything I do is genius because I'm a genius and I'm going to carry on anyway. And it's a strange album. Musically, it's difficult. It's lacking in melody. It's obtuse. It has a strange structure. It's repetitive. It has a very difficult and divisive kind of approach. I mean, basically it's forgettable. There's like 3 songs on this I can remember, and I should never be in a situation where I can only remember 3 songs on this. Also, by the way, it's a fevered dreamscape of a man having a midlife crisis. So the Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking, which according to the lyrics here on side 1, yes, my copy's water damage because water is a thing, starts at 4:30 a.m. That's the time of his dream, and then it runs all the way through to approximately and let's just quickly check, 5:11, the moment of clarity. So the album is structured as a soundtrack to a dream by a middle-aged man as he goes hitchhiking through America. And it's strange because, you know, there's Arabs and cowboys and girls and West German skies and cars and weird lyrics and sex, and it doesn't make sense. It really doesn't. So, you know, listening to the lyrical concepts of something like Time, Breathe, Wish You Were Here, you can kind of, as a listener, connect to that and go, yes, that makes sense. I understand that. I can feel things like, you know, the song has gone, you know, the song is over. I thought I had something more to say, or Money, or Us and Them, or Breathe, or Wish You Were Here, or even songs like, you know, Comfortably Numb. Those are songs that audience members can listen to and relate to. And when you're when I listen to music and I think about, how does this connect to me? What does it mean to me? What purpose does it serve to me? You know, if I'm in a bad mood, I'll put on Nine Inch Nails. If I want to drive a car really fast, I'll put on Nights of Red. If I want to walk around tectonically and pretend I'm invincible in leather, I'll listen to Front 242. If I really want to burn the whole world down to the ground, it's probably going to be Slayer's Rain in Blood. You know, and if I want to be a featureless robot barreling his way through an Excel spreadsheet, it's going to be Kraftwerk. So, you know, that's the thing, is as a listener, I bring my own conceptions to the albums, I bring my own ideas to the albums, and I then connect to the music if it connects to me, and if it says something to me about the universal human condition. I am under no illusions. I'm not particularly special. In fact, I'm pretty bloody average in many, many respects, and I know that. And so therefore, if you're writing a song and it connects to someone who thinks they're pretty average in many, many ways, what you're doing is you're doing what all great art does. And art illuminates the artist and the listener's view of the world. It presents a new perspective on something. There are many, many times when I've been listening to a song and I've thought, why didn't I think of that? Or yes, of course. Or I felt like that and I wasn't able to articulate it the way in which the song lyric does. I'm going to mention John Grant's It Doesn't Matter to Him, which is one of the best songs of all time. And when I listen to that, and I suddenly go, oh my God, yes, I totally experience that feeling. But somehow you wouldn't necessarily get a sense of that when you're listening to this. Because unless you've had a fever dream about hitchhiking across the American outback and being kidnapped by Arabs and having sex with random women, there's very little in this to relate to. In fact, probably the only really amazing song on this is Every Stranger's Eyes, the song which Roger played live the most on his solo tours, and has, you know, the lyrics. Although I will say Roger is extremely good at what I call a list song, and a list song is just a list of things which happen. And so, for example, Every Stranger's Eyes has, you know, in truck stops and hamburger joints and Cadillac limousines, and the company of has-beens and bent-backs and sleeping forms on pavement steps, in libraries and railway stations, in books and banks, pages of history, in suicidal cavalry attacks. I recognise myself in Every Stranger's Eyes. It's a list of a song, and it's not, you know, amazing, but it does the job. And it has memorable parts in it and memorable lines. And it has Eric Clapton on guitar, and Eric does a great job, but Eric's tone isn't as good or as tasteful as David Gilmour, and Eric has less space in his playing. One thing about David is, especially as he moved into his later years, is what mattered with David and Rick especially was not just the space, but the space between the spaces. So it was the air, the pause, the anticipation, the moment. Whereas for Eric, it seems that he has to kind of slather everything in the note and not let it hang. And sometimes you need silence that speaks so much louder than words to make its point. And so the album, it's not very good. It really isn't. It's very derivative, and I'll say it's derivative in two ways. The first one is pretty much every song is in 6/8 time, which is not the most memorable or perhaps easy of time signatures. The second one is that the Oh Babe count is really, really high. And if you think about, you know, Don't Leave Me Now, One of My Turns, for example, there's always the line that Roger uses very, very frequently in the 80s, which is, oh, babe. And then, of course, you know, it's here. It's on Pros and Cons approximately 14 times, and you're never more than about 3 minutes away from Roger announcing, oh, babe, about something. And the chord progressions are reused. So you've got the Fletcher Memorial Homes chord progression is used in here, as is Your Possible Pasts. Sexual Revolution that's on here was recorded by Pink Floyd in the demo sessions for The Wall, and originally intended to go on The Wall, but it's been picked up, stolen, and then dropped back down. Now, I mean, obviously, if Roger can steal from anyone, he's going to steal from himself. But on the flip side of that, we're going to say, this sounds like a man running out of ideas. There's only so many chord progressions, and he's already starting to reuse them. It's fundamentally an album that I think, realistically, if Pink Floyd had recorded it, somebody in Pink Floyd would have sat back and went, must try harder, it's not good enough, you need to write more songs. And a man with an ego the size of Roger's at the time probably wouldn't have accepted that as anything apart from the Muffins and their dismal vision crushing his inevitable and perfect genius. So it's fair to say I'm being a bit bitchy about the album, but ultimately I've paid for this and it's not particularly great. And that's what matters, is that when you're putting a record out, you have to think about, there are only so many options that people have, both in terms of their time, and time is a currency you never get more of, and in terms of their money. When I was 14, 15, I could buy one LP a week. Still can, actually. Nothing ever changes but the shoes. But I could only buy one LP a week. So if I bought an LP and it sucked, I had a week until I could get another one. And frankly, I would have been very disappointed with Pros and Cons. Roger, genius. He wrote all those great songs, but none of them are on this LP. So in terms of good songs that are on here, Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking is pretty good. Every Stranger's Eyes is pretty good. Arabs with Knives and West German Skies, that's not a great name for a song. Running Shoes isn't a great name for a song. Generally, there's two really good songs, and they're both at the end of the LP. So I think it's fair to say Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking was a triumph of ego over reality. It's not very good. at all. And then Roger went on tour. And this time he went on tour with Andy Newmark, Michael Kamen, Tim Renwick, and he played, started off in arenas, and then cancelled 3 shows in Dortmund, Frankfurt and Nice because of a lack of decent ticket sales, which when you think that you're in Pink Floyd and you could sell umpteen dates at Earl's Court Arena 3 years before, makes you think that maybe you've overestimated your commercial sus. Eric Clapton was in the band, and I think he struggled with the very, very structured, very precise, time-coded nature of the shows, which is that there was no improvisation. Everything was locked down to the second. It became more a recital or a theatre performance than a live show, and he left. So you can imagine Roger Waters and Eric Clapton touring a set of Pink Floyd songs, and you're not selling enough tickets to make it viable in the 80s. And that tells you that perhaps he's overestimated, the brand recognition that goes with him. This is a bootleg CD recorded at New York's Radio City Music Hall on the 28th of March, 1985, which is a radio broadcast from the tour. This is the show from the tour worth listening to. And the set list starts off and is very Floyd-centric. So the first 74 minutes are Welcome to the Machine, Set the Controls to the Heart of the Sun, Money, Wish You Were Here, Pigs on the Wing, Get Your Filthy Hands Off My Desert, Southampton Dock, The Gunner's Dream, In the Flesh, Nobody Home, Have a Cigar, Another Brick in the Wall, The Happiest Days of Our Lives, and Another Brick in the Wall Part 2. Then there's an interlude. Then there's 45 minutes of the pros and cons of hitchhiking, plus an encore of Brain Damage and Eclipse, which comes to 2 hours 15 minutes. And Nick Mason saw the tour, I think London's Earl's Court, and said he felt like Widow Twankey. It was really weird watching another band play his songs. Kind of like seeing Roger play a tribute band. And at this point, by the way, Roger was still a member of Pink Floyd. So the idea of going, if David will tour and Roger will tour and everyone will make a solo album, the problem is the relationship in Pink Floyd, not the fact that they're that they don't want to tour. It's just there's something that's not quite right there, and that's an interesting perspective. The US tour carried on 17th of July to 31st of July, and then between the 19th of March and 14th of April, a second US tour, which means that, for example, in places where perhaps Roger could have sold tickets, he could have gone back to Europe, he could have played Japan, for example, he didn't do so. And so therefore, kind of thought, and had a bit of, if you're an egotistical and you kind of think, oh, right, I'm going to be amazing and all I've got to do is put it out there to the world and everyone's going to snap their hands off. And suddenly the reality is, people weren't that interested in solo Pink Floyd at that time. Solo tours were not really a thing. Solo tours are much more a thing these days when people get to the ages of 70 or 80, and the only way that you'll get to see some of these songs played live is solo tours, because the band doesn't exist. This felt like Roger Waters was cheating on Pink Floyd, even though he had already left Pink Floyd in his mind. And in July 1985, Pink Floyd were asked to play Live Aid, and Roger said no, but he offered his solo band, and Live Aid declined. And that was the beginning of the end. Because in August 1985, Nick Mason, the last outstanding person, released his solo record, which is called Profiles. And is Profiles any good? It's better than Z, certainly. And it's got some moments that feel like Diet Pink Floyd, actually. So it's Mason and Fenn. So Nick Mason and Rick Fenn. Rick Fenn of 10cc. Please don't ask me why the band are called 10cc. But ex-10cc guitarist Rick Fenn was introduced to Nick Mason by Eric Stewart of 10cc, and they started writing music for adverts and turned it into an LP. There is no great reason for Profiles to exist, and I don't think any of the songs from Profiles have been played live by any of the people that recorded it. It felt that what it was doing is, again, like Roger's album, it was lacking the space between the spaces. The drumming on the album, and bearing in mind that Nick Mason is officially a drummer, feels very programmed, very pedestrian, very boring to play. And it felt to me that Nick was more moving into the realm of being, keyboard, sound effects, and being less of a drummer and more of a kind of an all-round keyboardy guy, which maybe wasn't where his passion really sat. Some songs on here are quite good. Some of the material is very definitely would have made nice instrumental stuff on a Floyd record. Some of it not so much. Some of it you can clearly hear it was designed as an advertising jingle that was turned into a song. But there is one fabulous piece of music on this record, which not enough people know, and it's called Lie for a Lie. And that is Nick and David and Rick Fenn. Nick and Rick, was it Rick Fenn? Yeah. Recording an instrumental, and then David adding his lyrics to it. And it sounds like a mid-80s kind of Floyd attempt at a pop hit. It's not great, but it's really good, really interesting, and vastly overlooked in the discography. And then what happened? Well, Roger, having been turned down for Live Aid, and not having his Live Aid, not having his Pink Floyd light kind of solo band offer accepted, found himself at a bit of an impasse. He wanted to dismiss Steve O'Rourke, apparently Pink Floyd's manager, but Pink Floyd, David Gilmour and Nick Mason declined his lovely suggestion to fire the band's long-standing manager. Then Roger also started renegotiating his deal with Steve in terms of, you get X% of this for managing me, and kept the rest of the band outside of those conversations, so they didn't necessarily know that was happening. And in October 1985, Waters issued a High Court injunction to prevent the name Pink Floyd ever being used again, which was heard in 1986. He was of the opinion that Pink Floyd was a spent force and therefore needed to be released from that. However, product commitments and managerial deals and legal stuff got in the way. He resigned using the leaving member clause, but CBS, the label in America that he'd signed to, had a product commitment and would have sued Roger Waters for loss of earnings as he failed or blocked future Pink Floyd releases through non-cooperation. And so, since he was the one preventing the band from recording, he felt compelled to resign from the band, with the belief that, as he said earlier, the Muffins will never do it. Well, sometimes he was wrong. Or, as David said, you know, I'm right. And that's what happened. Roger Waters left the band so he wouldn't be sued by CBS. The management deal fell apart, and Roger terminated Steve as his manager and got separate management. And then all of a sudden, Pink Floyd was down to 2 people, and Roger was telling them, "You'll never do it. You won't do it. You haven't got the songs. And since Pink Floyd is dead and I am Pink Floyd, if I leave, the band's over. You've got nothing." But as we all know, don't dare underestimate someone, because it's fun to watch them be proved wrong. And that is where we go next with Pink Floyd, is the rebirth of Pink Floyd, as David and Nick, without Roger in the way, blocking them and working out what's happening next. Roger underestimated David and Nick and their creative abilities, and that leads us to the difference of opinion, is the nice way of putting it, that exists to this day between the two sides of the band. And as Keith Richards said to, I think it was Duff McKagan or Slash, is always be in the room. Be the first person there and the last person to leave, and no one can sack you. And sometimes being successful is about longevity and about seeing the course and seeing what happens. And that is where the Pink Floyd solo years gets brought to a halt, at least for a little while, because there's a lot more to come on that front. But I'll pick that up some other time. So, as David said, we're near the end, and also, you know I'm right. And so that's where I'm going to wrap up now. My short recommendations are: don't buy Z's album Identity, it's crap. You can buy Profiles if you like. Pros and Cons is okay, but if you really only need one of them, buy David Gilmour's About Face, because I think it's the best one of the lot. But in the meantime, of course, there is a new David Gilmour solo album out called Luck and Strange. Listen to that and enjoy it, and hopefully you've got tickets for his tour. So if you're going to some of the shows, I might see you there, and if you're not, I'll see you in the comments section. Right, I know the 2 most dreaded words in the human lexicon are solo album, alongside possibly I'm pregnant, but mostly solo album is a more terrifying concept. And I've just introduced you to 4 of them, only one of which is really genuinely quite good. So I'm not going to regale you with tales of my outlandish dreams about being abducted by Arabs with knives or any other sexist bollocks. I'm just going to go downstairs. I'm going to watch a program about haunted houses. I'm going to laugh at stupid things to do with ghosts, where there's always an imp or something. Always an imp, because imps are really, really common on Help My House is Haunted, which is one of the worst programs ever made. It's still not as good as Interceptor, but definitely better than any of those Love Island things, which I never ever watch. Hang on, I lost my thread. I don't know what I'm talking about now. I think I better stop. Take care of yourselves and each other. See you soon. All right, bye.